Let's talk about a whole bunch of weapons with apocalyptic levels of firepower, with the top 20 most powerful guns in Warhammer 40K. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought we'd talk about some Titans and Super Heavies and the things that hunt them, and take a look through a whole bunch of doomsday lasers, enormous cannons and massive plasma guns, with 20 other things in the game that could be argued to be the most powerful firepower. For this one I thought it would be fun to see what some of the most powerful weapons on the tabletop arguably are, whether they're big things carried by super heavy tanks, massive Titan class weapons, or other forms of cataclysmic firepower. Taking a look at each one of the weapons, how they fire in the lore, and the unit that it's mounted on, and its role in its individual army. Just for a very arbitrary judge of strength, I thought we'd take a look at guns that are particularly good at destroying a land raider. I think it's reasonable enough for a scope of judging the most powerful weapons in the game to have perhaps a fairly standard heavy tank be the measuring stick, so that's a toughness 12, 2+ save tank. I thought it would be interesting to grade the guns as to how many wounds they can put on one of those with an average round of firepower. For this contest I'm going to look at non-legends units with a single gun profile. They can use any detachment rules out of the army that they happen to be in, but no other support beyond that, with stratagems or datasheet buffs from other units out there. I'm not sure it's necessarily the perfect measure. Obviously some things will be a lot better against splatting hordes of infantry or lots of elite terminators, but I think it's a fairly fun one, and I feel like the really big anti-tank guns do feel like they should be the most destructive around there. In any case, let's jump into it and talk through 20 of the nastiest guns in Warhammer 40k. First up, and starting with the Astra Militarum, there's a few of these that are mounted on the Baneblade chassis, the first of which is the Doomhammer Magna Cannon. Every Baneblade tank is basically a rolling fortress, absolutely covered in guns and very heavily armoured, and the Doomhammer's no exception. And this one has the rather interesting battlefield role of both being an enormous troop carrier, as well as packing a weapon of such awesome close range punch that it can be a threat to enemy Titans. The Doomhammer Magna Cannon is a laser weapon in the lore, though it seems to have the Melta keyword in game. D6 plus 3 shots at a big strength 12, AP 4 and damage D6, but it gets a pretty massive Melta 6, and also counts enemy units as being within Melta range even if you're out to full range, so usually meaning that it's going to be dealing damage D6 plus 6, averaging us around about 13 wounds completely unbuffed, even if it could maybe get orders from Lord Solar in reality. Not a bad massive laser weapon to start us off. Next up, and getting on to a true melter weapon, is the Thermal Cannon. This one most prominent on the Knight Errant, a great big melter weapon which are a staple in Warhammer 40k for dealing with heavy tanks and vehicles. They're short-range thermal energy weapons that use subatomic processes to fuel a tight beam of searing heat, short-ranged but utterly deadly, and capable of melting straight through the thickest armour. The Thermal Cannon is an enormous melter weapon and well capable of melting an entire battle tank in a single shot, and the Knight Errant definitely used it to good effect. Close range ferocity with 2d3 shots at strength 12, AP 4 and damage d6, plus again the Melta 6 keyword, which means that if you can get it within 12 inches, it's ridiculously vicious. The Errant also gets a +1 ballistic skill against targets, and the nightly rerolls from Lay Low the Tyrants, meaning that you're very likely to land a bunch of wounds at that very scary d6 plus 6 profile. This one also maths out to average around 13 wounds to our unlucky Land Raider. Next up, we've got our first Titan mounted weapon in the Reaver Laser Blaster. The Warhound Turbo Laser didn't quite make the list, but essentially this one's a triple-barreled version of the standard Turbo Laser melted by that. Essentially a really big direct laser energy weapon, having a little bit more of a higher rate of fire compared with things like the mighty Volcano Cannons that we'll certainly get onto. There's two versions, the top mounted gun on the Warlord Titan and the arm variant mounted on the Reaver, as you can see here. Next up, we've got the Adeptus Custodes, and their Ares gunship mounts the enormous Arachnus Magna Blaze Cannon. Another direct energy weapon, but this one of exceptionally high craftsmanship, enormously potent in the energy that it can unleash, but unfortunately that comes with the tendency to overheat, maybe hence the blaze part perhaps, needing incredibly expensive, resource-intensive casings to be able to keep it cool in, or being mounted on gunships in the upper atmosphere, such as the Ares gunship here. The Custodes Ares is a potent terror weapon of the Golden Legion, bypassing enemy defences with its Eclipse shield that can shroud the target in darkness when hit, and then blast from this mighty weapon can lay low the greatest enemy war machines. In game it's got 3 shots hitting at a big strength 18, AP 4 and damage d6 plus 6, or the Custodes' very accurate ballistic skill of 2+. Again, it's around about 13 wounds on average to a Land Raider. Certainly a bit on the costly side for its use in game though. The Ares would set you back a cool 580 points if you want to field one. Next up, we've got an Eldari big gun in the Scorpion Twin Pulsar. Mounted on the Scorpion tank of the same name, this one's basically a twin Xenos laser weapon. Essentially, it's pretty much the Eldari version of the Shadowsword, a huge mobile weapon platform designed to be a grav tank that can take down the biggest enemy war machines, from Orc Gargants to Lumpen Imperial Titans. This one again has a great big laser, kind of similar to the Eldari Bright Lances, but on a much bigger scale. Far superior compared with Imperial laser weapons thanks to psychically grown crystals, and universally very effective against virtually any sort of armour out there. Pulsars are strong enough to be capable of slicing tanks in two or penetrating Titan class armour with relative ease. In game it's got 6 shots at strength 18, AP 3 and a big damage 5, all with twin linked, plus the battle host rerolls that Eldari can get, and that averages 14 wounds against our Land Raider targets. Next up we've got the upscaled Warlord laser blaster that won't dwell on too much. Basically the same thing as the Reaver one, but a top-mounted carapace gun for that. These ones interestingly have a lower rate of fire, but a higher amount of damage from them, and a little bit of extra AP that just has it nose ahead very slightly compared with its Reaver counterpart. Next up we've got the Nemesis Quake Cannon. This one is the primary weapon of the Nemesis Warbringer Titan, essentially a gigantic artillery piece Titan, designed to engage enemies at extreme range, in the lore being able to hit foes up to 24 kilometers away, with acceptable enough accuracy. The Quake Cannon has the rather grim feature of carrying a fragment of a planet subject to Exterminatus, somehow being able to store the energy that was unleashed upon the planet and unleash it upon its target, creating enormous cracks, fissures and tectonic activity beneath whatever it hits, so just as likely to destroy the earth and ground around the target as much as it does its actual thing that it strikes. The Nemesis Titan is well used to using it to take down enemy Titans, often backed up by Volcano Cannons on its arm weapons, and in game this long-range nightmare is realised by a great big D6 plus 6 Strength 16, AP 4 and Damage 4 artillery weapon that can fire at a fairly crazy 480 inch range, so I guess tanks on other tables aren't particularly safe from this thing. The Imperial Guard Banesword tank packs a slightly smaller version of this, and that has the fun rule that allows you to trigger Deadly Demise on a 3+ rather than a 6, so potentially could make some big things go pop. For another great big Baneblade mounted weapon though, next up we have the Stormsword Siege Cannon, a different flavour of concussive shell these ones. The concussive wave they're designed to unleash is designed to cut shockwaves through enemy fortifications and barricades, turning them into essentially flying shrapnel and weapons in their own right to utterly slaughter anything that was cowered behind them. It's a weapon of choice for dealing mass damage to elite infantry in cover and clear out enemy choke points and bunkers. As you can see by its appearance on this list though, it still does a massive number to enemy war machines, D6 plus 6 shots at strength 16, AP 4 and a damage D6 plus 2, getting ignore cover, and it also gets a fun concussive wave special rule, with a chance to inflict some mortal wounds on the things around it. It's 15 wounds worth of damage to a Land Raider on average. In general, I feel like the Baneblade chassis tanks for the Guard aren't really unusable, but maybe a little bit overshadowed at the moment by the Russes and Dawns, particularly since they got lethal hits against monsters and vehicles. The Stormsword does have a massively punchy main gun, but still will set you back a big 500 points. Next up we've got a nightly offering in the Knight Castellan's Volcano Lance. D3 shots hitting at a strength 18, AP 5 and a massive damage D6 plus 8. Made all the scarier by the fact that Knights get to reroll a single hit roll and a wound roll, plus it's also got a reroll damage result of 1 roll inbuilt as well. This one's a massive weapon designed to hunt and destroy other enemy Knights. Managed on the Castellan, the heavily armoured Dominus Knight, aimed to be a bastion of strength in the centre of a Knight household when it's in battle, laying waste to the enemy at range while other Knights charge in around it. There's certainly going to be a few more Volcano weapons on this list. They're enormous energy weapons with some cool lore, and seem to be the pinnacle of anti-tank technology for the Imperium. Average turn-on-turn damage does around about 16 wounds to an enemy Land Raider, so a pretty reasonable chance to one-shot them. Those rerolls help keep it incredibly reliable, being very likely to get at least 1 shot through, with a good chance for 2. Next up we're back to the Eldari once more with the Phantom Titan's Pulsar. The Phantom Titan is the larger class of Eldari enormous war constructs, a great Wraithbone war machine piloted by an Eldari who has to merge with the spirits of the former crew of the Phantom, working as one to fully harmonise with the machine, and the result gives rise to a battle titan with unmatched agility, being able to dance through the ranks of enemy war machines taking them down, with ridiculously better mobility versus the constructs of say the Imperium, Orcs, or other Xenos races they might be fighting. The Pulsar is essentially a bigger version of the one that was mounted on the Scorpion tank that we mentioned earlier, the biggest Eldari laser weapon in 40k, terrifying armor busting potential. In the rules it gets 8 attacks at strength 18, AP -4 and damage 6, or the inbuilt battle host rerolls. With average rolling, a Land Raider takes around about 19 wounds. Next up we've got another bigger knightly weapon, and the biggest class of Forge World Knight is the Knight Acastus chassis, where there's two variants, the Asterius and the Porhyrion. These knights are basically massive walking fortresses, enormously thick carapaces, and weapons that can certainly threaten titans. The Asterius can be put to use as a fortress-breaking knight with its terrifying antimatter beams from its conversion weapons. Conversion beams are a bit of rare technology in Warhammer 40k, pre-heresy archaeotech that fires a directed beam of antimatter, having the unusual property that at short range it's not actually as effective and needs a bit of time to build up momentum and focus before becoming dispersed again. This one's realised in game by quite a cool mechanic. The gun's got a 48-inch range. It gets sustained hits D3 if you fire it normally, but if you take aim at a target that's at least 24 inches away, then you get sustained hits D3 on anything on a 4+, so it means its 3 attacks are likely to turn into far more than 3 hits. Beyond that though, you basically got 3 attacks at strength 16, AP2 and damage 6, twin links to reroll the wound roll, and a sustained hits D3 means that you average somewhere around the 6 hits sort of mark once you've taken into account the nightly hit rerolls they can get. The AP is the only thing that really lets this down, but if the Land Raider is saving on a 4+ out of cover, it's a big 20 wounds dealt to that, and you even get a +1 damage against vehicle targets, going to a +2 against Titanics. In general they're pretty terrifying knights, but generally tend to be considered a bit too many points in one unit for more competitive games of Warhammer 40k, even if you're likely to win most direct firefights against enemy heavies that take aim at this thing, both with its massive damage and defense. Next up we're back to the Reaver Titan once more, and this time we've got the Melta Cannon, one of the most dangerous melta guns in existence, and a bigger version of the previously mentioned thermal cannon, this one using a miniature fusion reactor to power the sheer amount of subatomic heat that this can generate. Reaver Titans are flexible main battle titans, a little bit faster than the bigger Warlord pattern that makes up the bulk of many Titan legions, a little bit slower than a Warhound but packing far more punch in terms of firepower, 2 arm-mounted weapon systems and 1 carapace one. We're definitely getting to the point where the weapons are throwing around some very silly numbers in game. This one has D6+2 shots, hitting at strength 13, AP4 and flat damage 6, and then if you're in Melta range, which I've counted this one as being, that damage 6 goes all the way up to damage 10. With average rolling against our Land Raider, that usually gets around 2 wounds through, so a big 20 wounds per activation there. Next up we've got the premier Titan killer of the Astra Militarum, the terrifying Shadowsword with its Volcano Cannon, squadrons of which are well capable of spelling doom to the biggest enemy war machines around. As mentioned, Volcano weapons are basically enormously high-powered direct energy weapons, massive lasers, and thought to be known as such for their ability to turn stone into magma instantly with the sheer power of their beams. Doubling down on the lava theme, the crystal that's used to manufacture these is mined from a flawless crystal from the lava rivers on the specific planet of Cinderus 11. The crystal is disturbingly thought to have been something to do with the brutal burial of thousands of heretical psychers in the planet's past. Whatever their provenance though, the Shadowsword's gun is incredibly effective. D3+1 shots with the heavy keyword, so hitting on a 3+ if it's static, or at strength 24, AP5 and a big damage 12 for every hit that gets through. With average rolling that equates to 20 wounds per turn, and has a reasonable chance of one-shotting some enemy super heavies from the other side of the table. It always does feel a bit weird though that in more practical games of 40k it's still limited to killing around about 3-ish infantry models. A bit weird how big weapons like this can leave swarms remarkably unscathed. Next up we're back for our last knightly weapon, and here we've got the counterparts to the Knight Asterius, the Porphyrion's Magna cannons, the other Acastus pattern of knight. As mentioned, the Acastus pattern are a pretty rare pattern of knight, revered as many as physical icons of the machine god's providence, who is not universally popular in the knight household, seen as a bit of an enforcer or a knight slayer type suit, and is not regarded with quite the same amount of honour as some of the other classes due to essentially being an enormous walking gun turret. The las cannons it mounts though are the biggest patterns of las cannons that you can find on the tabletop, again incredibly potent imperial laser weapons, d6 shots each at strength of 18, AP4, twin linked and a massive damage d6+6, very slightly outcompeting its brother Acastus against the Land Raider, mainly due to having significantly better AP. In gameplay, this one tends to be the one that gets played a little bit more than its counterpart, just due to being really quite a lot cheaper in points and doing a kind of similar job overall. Into the top 5 now though, and we're starting to get to some seriously ridiculous sized weapons. Here we've got one of the primary armaments of the Warlord Battle Titan. The Sunfury Plasma Annihilator is the single most dangerous plasma gun in Warhammer 40K currently. Most plasma weapons being a little bit below featuring on this list due to being a bit more effective against mass infantry, but this one will definitely do a number on big tanks and vehicles as well. In 40k, plasma weapons are again directed energy weapons that fire gouts of superheated plasma matter, always well known for their capacity to be a bit unstable, overheat and explode on occasion. This enormous weapon is directly linked to the plasma reactors of the Warlord Titan and was developed initially from designs intended for warships of the Imperial Navy. Massively potent against anything that's battle tank size or less, a little bit less strong against enemy super heavies, though it can cause destruction over a wide area, eradicating entire formations of elite infantry and power armour. For its damage output, it does get a lot more shots than most of the weapons that we've looked at, 2d6 plus 6 shots, so a big 13 attacks then, all at strength 12, AP 3 and damage 8, strength 12 giving it the breakpoint to wound our Land Raider on a 4+, and it averages around about 23 damage as a result. Kind of hilarious that the hazardous roll on this could just maybe chip off a couple of mortal wounds on your Warlord. Feels like the consequences should be bigger than that somehow. Otherwise, for another Warlord Titan primary weapon, we've got the Quake Cannon. This one is essentially a slightly bigger and upgunned direct fire version of the Quake Cannon that's mounted on the Nemesis Warbringer one. Again, Quake shells that are designed to breach fortress gates and sunder defences with seismic shockwaves, with their chunk of Exterminator's planet on board. The seismic upheaval around their targets can often slow them to a crawl after firing, potentially allowing enemy Titans to be hit by even more weaponry from other things. Like the plasma gun, it's also mounted on the Warlord Titan, the biggest Titan available for standard size Warhammer 40k right now, a staple bastion of strength and power in the Titan legions for Imperials and the ones that have fallen to chaos, massive in armour and absolutely covered in guns. This one equals the Sunfury gun in damage output, 3d6 shots at strength 16, AP 4 and damage 6 with ignores cover, and clocks in at 23 wounds. For the single scariest Xenos weapon currently, we have the enormous rail cannon mounted by the Taunar Supremacy armour, the other railgun patterns not being enormously behind the rest of the list but not quite making it on. The heavy rail cannon array is the biggest weapon that the Earthcaster managed to bolt onto the Supremacy armour, the single largest class of Tau battlesuit right now, and designed for more static defense, sacrificing the mobility of its smaller cousins for just enormous firepower. Tau rail weapons use electromagnetic linear acceleration technology to zoom a solid projectile to ridiculous hypersonic speeds, the mass impact on the target being far more than most weapons with explosive ordnance can bring to bear. And even smaller rail weapons are well capable of piercing a tank's armour and going out the other side again, let alone ones of this scale more designed to punch through shields and the absolute toughest war machines that the enemy might bring to bear. The rail cannon gets 2 shots at strength 26, AP -5 and a crazy damage 16, all with devastating wounds and the heavy keyword, and for this one I thought it would make sense to allow the Taunar to be guided for the attacks, allowing its reroll ones to hit as well, as it would just be ridiculously easy to pick that up from somewhere in the army. For the turn-on-turn average, it's 26 wounds to the Land Raider, and it even comes with a handy built-in fragmentation shell launcher as well. Technically a different gun, but not too bad to get that as a bonus on top of that kind of terrifying firepower. In practical games of 40k, their points total is a bit on the limit of what's practical anyway, but the Tau big things tend to suffer really quite a lot from the guiding rules, not being able to split fire very efficiently at all, and this thing kind of needs to with its different primary weapons, as it needs to be dealing lots of damage to multiple things a turn and not just focusing on one. Lastly though, for our biggest 2 weapons, we've got a couple of massive Volcano Cannons. First up, the Reaver Volcano Cannon, going back to the Titan killing weapon variant on that one, and this one can also be mounted as arm weapons for the Warbringer Nemesis Titan as well. As we know already, basically the finest class of Imperial laser weaponry, capable of melting stone down to lava, and this pattern of the gun again fires at D3+1 shots like the Shadowsword, but this time at a big 24 strength at AP 5 and damage 14, and a little bit more accurately as well if the Shadowsword doesn't have orders. Finally, last but not least though, and it seems that the single biggest and scariest anti-tank gun in Warhammer 40k is the mighty Belicosa Volcano Cannon, our mounted primary weapon of the Warlord Titan, and this one strikes at a massively crazy D3+3, strength 32, AP 5 and damage 18. Kind of hilarious that it can wound other Warlord Titans on a 2+, never mind anything else. A single failed save against this thing will account for our Land Raider, and it doesn't even get a save at all unless it either has Armour of Contempt or Cover. And for our firing range target, we get a big 50 wounds on it on average, bringing all the Emperor's might down on that one target in laser form. Overall, there's a pretty massive amount of scary gun profiles out there in Warhammer 40k. It was fun to take a look at a few of the very strongest of them, and if you spot any others that I might have missed for one faction or another, feel free to let me know down in the comments below. I feel like for these ones, they tend to go to the factions that have the most super heavies, and particularly any that sort of specialise in destroying enemy tanks in the lore. It does feel like there's maybe some notable exceptions on the list, kind of a shame not to see some Necron things on there perhaps. The Synaptic Obliterators of the Seraptech Heavy Construct don't quite make it on there, and I did even look up the Legends profile for the Gauss Pylon, but its 10th edition rules were a bit underwhelming really, just getting a single shot. For a few honourable mentions, I thought the Orc Death Cannon on the Stomper could be worth a shout out. It doesn't really have the biggest damage profile, only averaging 7 wounds with the Dread Mob buff, but could get some seriously quite big numbers if we allowed it a cheap mecha long, plus access to that bigger shells for bigger gits stratagem. For this video I decided to leave that out for simplicity though. And here were just a few of the guns that were kind of near misses. The Warlord Gatling Blaster is kind of hilarious that even the anti-infantry gun on the Warlord Titan nearly makes it onto the anti-tank list. The Night Valiant's Thundercoil Harpoon is incredibly reliable at punching its 12 damage through between nightly rerolls and its special rule. The Warhound Titan's Turbo Laser Destructor is one, the Banesword's Quake Cannon for the Astra Militarum, the Eldar Phantom Titan's D-Bombard, and the Cobra D-Impaler for another big scary grav tank. As mentioned, if you spot anything else fun, then feel free to let me know. Finally, just to round up, I thought we'd just mention the Khorne Lord of Skulls Skullhurler. Maybe not too far away from the lower rungs of the list, with an average damage of 10 wounds in the Vashtor detachment with the Sustained Hits Dark Pact on the go. That could be getting some serious mileage out of its 2d6 shots at strength 14, AP 3 and damage 3. Just for fun ammunition though, this thing's got the best beats. It's a great big cannon that launches flaming skulls at the foe, and in the lore it either has the choice of firing smaller flaming skulls out of the big skull's mouth, supposedly if you want to cut down some infantry I guess, or fire the entire big skull if you just want a whole load of skull goodness to explode some enemy titans or heavies. That certainly sounds like the sort of thing that you'd come up with if you asked Khorne the Blood God to design a gun. It also gets a slightly more dedicated anti-tank profile in the Demon Gore Cannon on the front of it as well. The lore behind that is that it fires basically burning filth at the foe. Chaos definitely wins a bunch of points for creativity. In any case, I'll leave that there for this one. Let me know your thoughts as to a few of the biggest cannons and mightiest ordnance in Warhammer 40k 10th edition down in the comments below. If you'd like to see more like this, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post some new ones just about every day. Finally, if you've been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that links down in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep these coming. Channel patrons do get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.